Diolch Chris. A diolch hefyd i ti Chris ac i Catrin a Gary a Fiona am yr holl waith i chi'n neud yn hyrwyddo'r bartneriaeth yma. Mae'n rhywbeth i ni'n credu'n gryf yno fe o safbwynt i werth ac am i weld yn parhau am gyfnod hir i ddod. Felly, ymraint i yw cyflwyno prif siaradwr y bore. Yr athro Huw Morris, Llywodraeth Cymru, mae'n gyfrwyddwr grŵp sgiliau addysg uwch a dysgu gyda loes ers mis Medi 2013. Cyn hynny'n ddirprwys gynghello'r Mhrifysgol Salford. Mae gyfrifoldebau nawr yn cynnwys yr is-adran cyflogaeth a sgiliau addysg bellach a phrentisiaethau, yr is-adran addysg uwch, yr is-adran ymgysylltu a chyflogaeth ieuenctid. Ond dim ond hanner y stori yw hynny wrth gwrs. Oherwydd nawr mae Google yn dod yn ddefnyddiol iawn i chwilio am wybodaeth gefndir am eich siaradwyr. Felly hefyd mae Huw Morris yn niwrolegydd ac yn ymchwilydd yng Ngholeg Prifysgol Llundain, mae'n debyg, ac yn gefnogwr rygbi brwd iawn. A'i tweet diweddaraf oedd Wales thrash Italy to put themselves in contention to win the Six Nations. Felly dwi'n dyfarch yn bod ni'n rhannu'r diddordeb yna. Yn adnabyddus hefyd yn y byd criced. Huw Morris yn chwaraewr ac yn gapten clwb Morgannwg fydd rhai ohonych chi'n gwybod yn iawn wedi sgoro bron i 20,000 o rediadau yn ei yrfa, yn eich 3 chap i Loegr yn 1991, ond ddim wedi gallu cael nôl i mewn i'r tîm ers hynny, yn anffodus i ti. Ac erbyn hyn wedi dychwelyd i'r sir yn 2013 fel prifweithredwr a chyfrwyddwr criced. Huw Morris hefyd yn sair coed llwyddiannus os ych chi'n chwilio ar y we, yn gweithio yn y gyrorau, mae gyda fe fusnes sydd yn creu pontydd, cabanau, gatiau, meinciau, byrddau, os ych chi angen unrhyw fath o ddodrefn pren ar gyfer y tu allan, ewch chi www.huwthewood.co.uk a fe gewch chi, dwi'n siŵr, bris cystadleuol gydag e. Mae Huw Morris hefyd yn ffotograffydd, yn gweithio yn Johannesburg, De Affrica, ond wrth gwrs i lawer ohono ni fwyaf adnabyddus fel bardd poblogaidd a gafodd ei eni yn 1622. Yn ail fab i Morris ap John ap Ednyfed o Hafod Gynfor, plwyf Llangollen, treuliodd y rhan fwyaf o'i fywyd yn ardal Llansilin. Nawr, does dim sicrwydd iddo dderbyn addysg yn well na'r cyffredin ar gyfer bechgyn yr ail ganrif ar 15 wrth gwrs y bryd hynny, credu iddo falle fynychu ysgol rad Croesoswallt neu ysgol ramadeg Rhuthun am gyfnod. Eglwyswr selog a brenhinwr tair iawn oedd Huw yn ystod y rhyfel cartre ac wedi hynny, ond fe lwyddodd osgoi rhai o'r peth o'r erlyd nath rhai o'r beirdd ddioddau dan law Cromwell yn sgil hynny. Ond fe ddath i gerddi yn boblogaidd iawn ledled Cymru oherwydd fe osodwyd y cerddi i'w canu ar alawon poblogaidd iawn oedd yn cael eu canu ledled Cymru. Ond olaf fe gladdwyd Huw yn ymyl eglwys Llansilin, ond mae'n braf nodi fod rhai o'i englynion wedi i gosod mewn ffenest liw yn yr eglwys yn agos i'w fedd. Felly os nag yw Huw yn mynd i ddarllen rhai o'r englynion hynny ni heddi, mae well i chi fynd lan i eglwys Llansilin i'w gweld nhw. Felly, ac yntau'n ddyn amrywiol iawn i dalentau, rwy'n siŵr bydd pob un ohonoch chi yn edrych ymlaen i glywed yr hyn sydd ganddo ddweud. Felly, plis rhowch groeso i Huw Morris.
Diolch, Rodri. Bore da. I'm sorry to disappoint you that I'm not an international cricketer, but I am going to, I hope, talk to you this morning about changes in higher education, and I hope I'm going to be able to give you a government perspective on that. In Chris's slides earlier, you saw the good position that government sees this alliance working in and our strong associations with the Funding Council in doing that. I've got a few slides that I want to run through with you. They sort of summarise a range of different government policy policy from the Funding Council, initiatives within the sector. All of those you will be familiar with in some senses. What I want to try and do is tie those together. The one Huw Morris that Rodri didn't mention is Huw Morris, who's commemorated down on the seafront in Aber-Bangor. There's a plaque on the wall just by the toilets along the seafront, and it says, Huw Morris, also known as Doris, died in 1992. So I'm hoping not to add to that number by boring you to death or drowning in a sea of figures. So do I just press it? Okay, so the aim, as I mentioned a moment ago, is to provide you with an overview of the opportunities and challenges facing higher education institutions in Wales over the next 5 years. And I've got about 5 or 6 slides. The first of those deals with universities in Wales and the success that these higher education institutions are providing for the people and businesses across Wales. Then I want to say a little bit about the changing context, because it is changing very, very fast. And it's beginning to have quite significant effects across the UK as we live through the experiment with the full-fledged marketisation of higher education in all of the nations of the UK, but particularly in England, to a slightly lesser extent in Wales. Then I'm going to say a bit about government policy, a little bit about sector developments, and then a fair bit about better practice. I hope there'll be time in covering particularly the last part for you to ask questions or make comments about what you've heard. As Rodri mentioned, I haven't always been a civil servant. I was for some time working in the university sector, and for about 30 years I worked in a range of different universities, seeking to recruit students, engage in research and have a good time. Some of that experience will come out in what I'm going to say. The picture behind this is particularly important to me because it's a picture, I think, of the Arts Centre here at Aber, and it reminds me that the first time I came to Aber-Bangor was in 1981, and I came with a woman who's now my sister-in-law, as she enrolled as an undergraduate. She was the third generation in her family who'd been to Aber-Bangor, and it's interesting to me to come back, as I often do, normally in the summer, previously in the Easter, for the old Aber-Bangorian Association, which is often in the Bellevue and occasionally in the Arts Centre. So that's the plan. Let's move on. Okay, so universities in Wales, a great success story, 9 universities and 12 further education colleges, many of which are also engaged in higher education directly or indirectly in preparing young people in partnership with universities for a higher education. 128,000 or thereabouts students, including 101,000 undergraduates and 27,000 postgraduates. This is impressive by anybody's standards and is a mark of the massive expansion that there's been in the sector over the last couple of decades. High quality and cost-effective research, and a really very encouraging set of results in the REF that was announced just before Christmas, and as Rodri mentioned, not least, and as Chris mentioned, not least in the partnership between Bangor and Aber-Bangor, the joint submissions really did pay off, and it was very pleasing to see. And 85% of students satisfied. That's just the average for Wales. There are many courses and many programmes where the figures far exceed that figure, and so that's very impressive to see. So a very strong base with a very significant economic impact. These figures are from Universities Wales, demonstrating a £3.6 billion impact on the Welsh economy. Universities very much are in the driving seat, particularly in North, Mid and West Wales, where they are very much the linchpin of the business world and the communities which they're a part of. And 92% of our graduates are in employment within 6 months, which is extremely impressive. So that's a snapshot overview of universities here. But the world is changing, and it's changing really quite significantly. I've picked out 6 of the big trends that you're all contending with. I want to just flesh out some of what that might mean. So, number 1, increasing student numbers overall. In Wales, student numbers up until last year were increasing. The applications figures for February to UCAS suggest that across the whole of Wales, the numbers are flat at 0%, no increase, no decrease, but significantly better than the position in England, where last year overall student numbers declined by 10%. You won't necessarily know that because the bulk of that reduction is in postgraduate numbers and the bulk of that is in mature student entrance and so forth. The largest growth in student applications and enrolments last year was at a Welsh university. Swansea University recruited an additional 22% of students over the course of the last 2 years. Massive increase in student numbers. Similar increases in other institutions. There seems to be, my colleagues who are economic geographers tell me it's an urban effect. My colleagues in the sports world tell me it's a Premier League effect. But figures are growing on many programmes. All institutions have got growth. Some have got more growth than others. But we are seeing particularly pronounced growth in Swansea and in Cardiff. Okay, so steady or growing student numbers here in Wales, declining in England, but that's not all of the picture. That's just the demand side. There's a supply side. If we go back 30 odd years to when I came here for the first time, there were 30 universities in the UK. There are now 165 institutions that can claim the university title, and a further 200 to 300 institutions offering higher education programmes which are paid for through public monies administered by the student loan company or others. So you don't have to be a mathematician to work out if you divide the demand figure by the supply figure, that's going to mean more competition. And that competition is between institutions, and it's in a world where students are ever more demanding that they get what they expect, and so there's quite a lot of emphasis on that in recent investigations by the Competitions and Market Authority looking at the consumer protection regulations for students across the UK, growing emphasis on providing information for students through KISS, through Unistats, through the Which University Survey, and so forth. The research that I've seen suggests that whilst there are all these information sources there, and there is the potential for litigation, for most students, the choices that they make are dictated by circumstance and perception. Most students will pick an institution that's not too far away from their home, but far enough away that they don't have to see their parents that often for the younger ones. And will be driven by perceptions of the place of the subject in that institution, perceptions of what they're going to get when they visit open days, as many students are doing downstairs as I speak. Okay, so higher expectations from students, emphasising for me the importance of continual dialogue with students at all levels. We spend a lot of time in Welsh Government and through the Funding Council talking to the National Union of Students and hearing what they have to say, responding to their manifesto, responding to their comments and suggestions about what might need to happen in the future. Changing patterns of international student recruitment and exchange, that presents enormous opportunities as new countries open up, particularly islands in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, established markets like Singapore and Hong Kong, established markets that continue to grow like China, but some areas of the world, student demand has been declining significantly. India halved in the space of the last 3 years. So these changes and the changes that have flown through as a consequence of the removal of post-work visas and the less liberal approach to Tier 4 visas for students have had significant implications for institutions and require institutions to be much more fleet of foot in developing their recruitment arrangements in different parts of the world and their partnership arrangements and so forth. I'm going to tell you a little bit later about an initiative organised by Universities Wales called Study Wales, which seeks to build on the experience of parallel initiatives in Scotland, Study Scotland, which have encouraged all the universities in Scotland, and we hope through Study Wales, all the universities in Wales, to club together and see the benefits of working jointly in overseas recruitment activity. Okay, so changing patterns of student recruitment and exchange, greater competition for research funds. Research funds through the research councils haven't been growing. The amount of money funded directly through the funding council hasn't been growing through QR. What this has meant is that with more institutions and more university staff, greater competition for funds. And for many research councils, the application to acceptance ratio is now standing at 8-1. Similar patterns emerging with some elements of European research funding, calling into question for some the costs of multiple applications versus the returns that come when overheads may be limited and staff time is called to do other things. And then the last on my list is more widespread use of open and online learning, but not necessarily in the ways that we anticipated. Some years ago, many institutions spent a lot of time putting their resources on the web, managed learning environments, Blackboard, Moodle and other initiatives were very much the focus. What we're finding now is the ubiquitousness of mobile phones and Google mean that actually what's happening is people are interacting with learning materials in a very different way, and that calls on different skills for lecturers, researchers and students. It isn't easily managed in the way that managed learning environments might suggest that they could be. So you probably knew all of that anyway. What you might not know, and I'll be asking questions in a moment, there's a written exam at 12 o'clock, is the detail of government policy, because there's quite a lot of it. And the trick in being a civil servant is to uncontentiously describe it in as boring a way as you possibly can and try to avoid saying anything novel or contentious. Okay, so what have we said in the areas of higher education, particularly in the tweetosphere? You have to be careful. I often read tweets of things I'm alleged to have said, and I think, if only I was that clever. Right, so the higher education, the policy statement on higher education, which emerged in 2013, shortly before the change in ministerial responsibilities that brought Huw Lewis to the education and skills portfolio. The policy statement on higher education focuses on 9 things and says that government is keen to encourage the development of these things within the sector, and will be looking to the Funding Council and other institutions through its funding and through its regulation to deliver these things. So I'll just read you through some of these. So number 1, the most important thing on the list is interaction with business to stimulate innovation and economic growth. That perhaps shouldn't be a surprise. The programme for government, which dictates all areas of Welsh Government activity, has as its number 1 priority jobs and growth. The view that the Labour Party in Wales had when they went to the last Assembly elections was that this should be the centrepiece of their manifesto, and that's been translated into the programme for government, translated into the policy statement on higher education. So going back to the slide before, a couple of slides ago, the 92% of people getting jobs within 6 months of employment is something to be applauded and congratulated. That's something that government values and welcomes and is very appreciative of. Number 2 on the list builds on that, work to enhance employability of all graduates, whatever age, background or course of study. One of the big advantages here in Wales, one of the reasons why the overall number of students in higher education has not declined like other parts of the UK is because the number of mature students has not declined as rapidly. The funding arrangements in place through the Assembly Learning Grant and other things have made it less of a cliff edge proposition for older people. Number 3, work in partnership with Welsh Government to develop international links. Again, come back to Study Wales later in the presentation. Number 4, collaborate with further education colleges to ensure there are opportunities to progress for all learners. Now, this is an area where I think there's enormous amount of very, very good practice in Wales. And look particularly to Bangor's relationship with groups Llandrillo Menai and the Higher Education Centre there, and the close partnership working is a real model to the rest of Wales, as is the relationships between University of South Wales and Merthyr Tydfil College and other institutions on the heads of the valley, the relationships between University of Wales Trinity St David and Coleg Sygar and Coleg Ceredigion, the relationships between Swansea University and members of its CUSP partnership, Nif Potorba College, and including colleges as far away as Coleg Cambria in the northeast of Wales. Now, what we're seeing is close alignment and the articulation of clear routes for progression. And that's, I think, I haven't got any data to prove it, as producing dividends for institutions as they're able to offer and opportunities for young people or older people to step on and step off and to see succession and development opportunities into the future. When I worked in Manchester, that was something that we looked to Wales to seek to emulate. So the developments with the Manchester College and in Salford were deliberately seeking to learn from the experiences of many of those projects that I've mentioned. And similarly, when I worked in Bristol and also in London, but not as a tree surgeon or neurosurgeon. Right. So that was number 4. Number 5, make better use of new technologies. And this is something where there's an enormous amount of uncertainty. Open University and Cardiff University are doing a great job as being very active partners in Future Learn, the Open University initiative, to take MOOCs and other forms of online environment to the broadest possible audience. And hundreds of thousands of people signing up for those programs. Not all of those are necessarily converting into fee-paying, fully registered students, but it is doing a great deal to encourage education and learning across people, for people across Wales and across the world. Number 6, strive to provide high-quality learning for all with the potential to benefit. And as we saw earlier, that's clearly something that's being achieved. Student satisfaction is going up year on year, and we're hearing more and more positive comments from the students' unions that we speak to. Number 7, develop the sector's reputation for excellence in research, another area of significant achievement. Number 8, continue to support the development of Welsh medium provision here in Aberystwyth. Coleg Cymraeg is doing a fantastic job of developing new materials and new ways of teaching. Particularly, I was pleased to see the last time I came here in the physics and in sciences. Where there is an enormous need for people to have these skills because of the enormous growth of Welsh medium education and the growing use of the Welsh medium in the workplace. Number 9, develop more flexible models of provision to build more sustainable and successful, a more sustainable and successful future. And I think that's particularly important here today because the strategic alliance that exists between Bangor and Aberystwyth is an example of just that type of alliance and collaborative, effective working. So that's a policy statement on higher education. That provides an umbrella for a range of other things which have happened over recent years. What else has happened? Well, the Web Review of Higher Education Provision in North East Wales, published in September 2013, was, for me, an articulation of a commitment from government to see regional solutions within Wales, solutions that have national and international reach, but which tie together institutions to support further and higher education, research and development across Wales. So we're still working through some of the consequences of the web review, but I think it has provided a useful blueprint for the sorts of things that we might begin to see even more of in other parts of Wales as time goes by. The review of open and online learning in 2014 surveyed the terrain and commented on the rise of MOOCs, reassured us that MOOCs were not going to radically transform the higher education sector, but emphasised the importance of keeping a watching brief on that and being quite creative in how we use these technologies. The skills policy statement in January 2014 emphasised the importance of planning at a regional level in South West Wales, in South East Wales and in North Wales in order to take the best advantage of European structural funds as they come through, to make sure that investments in infrastructure were complemented by investments in skill, to make sure that those furthest from the labour market were provided with a pathway to employment, and that there were routes to develop skills at the highest levels up to PhD level in important value-added industries. The skills policy statement has led to a number of other things. Statements on co-investment, which seek to get employers to take a greater share of the costs of further education and some elements of higher education for those in work. It sought to articulate targets and measures for the development of skills and education in Wales, and it's outlined a commitment to produce an assessment of the demand for different skills and education in different parts of Wales. And those demand assessments are scheduled to be published in March and April of this year. So within the next few weeks, you'll begin to see assessments from the South West Regional Learning Partnership of the needs for areas including Ceredigion, and you'll see similar assessments for North Wales from the North Wales Economic Ambition Board for areas covering Gwynedd and Anglesey and Conway and areas close to Bangor. And then in the next year or two, you'll begin to see comments from those organisations and their parallel body, the Learning Skills and Innovation Partnership in South East Wales. You'll be beginning to see comments on supply and where there is shortage and where institutions, whether they're further education colleges, universities or work-based learning providers, might wish to develop programmes and develop new ways of learning. There'll be funding to support that, and as part of the submission for European Social Fund, there's a desire to make sure that those investments are meeting those needs and pushing things forward. The Sir Cymru programme, developed by colleagues in the Department for Economy, Science and Transport, seeks to provide a government-funded fellowship programme to support the recruitment of the most able scientists, technologists, social scientists to work in universities across Wales. Many of those people will already be here, working in institutions. They'll be eligible to apply for funds. Some of these people will be attracted in to build on strength or to develop new strengths. Okay, so there's quite a lot going on. Let's see if we can finish this list. The Higher Education Act, which was a bill until 2 weeks ago, was sealed as an act. The first act passed here in Wales focused specifically on higher education. The big and significant change within that act is a requirement for universities to produce fees and access plans. Fees and access plans will specify how universities are acting to encourage people from disadvantaged backgrounds to make the most of their potential and to have a higher education experience. Across Wales, higher education institutions are doing extremely well in that regard, and many are significantly ahead of their benchmark or any target that any agency might seek to set for them. So I don't think there's much to be feared in this, but this is a legislative statement of another programme for government commitment, the commitment to equality and equity. So jobs and growth, but with equality and equity. We want to see the economy grow, but we want to see everybody prosper from that growth. And then the last on the list is one which is in flight, which is the review of higher education funding and student finance arrangements. One of the things that differentiates Wales from England in the higher education sphere is our approach to funding higher education. The Assembly Learning Grant and other initiatives, particularly to help disadvantaged students, mean that there's very much more funding going out in Wales to students to support their education, perhaps slightly less directly to institutions through the Funding Council. What we have set in train under the chairmanship of Sir Ian Diamond, the Vice-Chancellor at Aberdeen University, is a review of those arrangements. We've done that because there are growing fears in England that their funding arrangements may not be sustainable in the long run. A large proportion of students who have received loans for tuition or for maintenance are forecast in England not to repay those loans. And what that means is that other taxpayers will have to pay more tax to fund that. Some of that tax will come from those students themselves, but quite a large amount may come from people who've not had a higher education experience, and that wasn't part of the original plan. So in anticipation that there will be initiatives elsewhere in the UK to alter the student funding and finance arrangements, we've set in train our own review. We don't know what that review will recommend. It is an independent review. It's a cross-party review. It includes representatives of all of the political parties within the Senedd: Conservatives, Plaid Cymru, Liberal Democrats, Labour. It includes representatives of employers, of universities, of colleges, and of students. Amongst the questions that they're looking at is, have we got the balance right between funding postgraduate provision and making loans available to students to study PhDs and master's programmes? Have we got the right balance between maintenance and tuition fee support? Have we got the levels set at the right amount? Are we providing enough money for some of the more costly subjects that are delivered in universities? I'm hopeful that this review will produce results that everybody will welcome. Other reviews in other parts of education have done just that in recent months. The Furlong Review of Initial Teacher Education and Training, which was published on the 9th of March, the review of the curriculum in schools, the Donaldson Review, both those reviews published in the last 6 weeks have been uniformly, fairly universally welcomed by most parts of Welsh society, by those who receive those services and by those who provide those services. So let's hope that Diamond's review, the initial results of which, or initial findings, will come in November of this year, and final recommendations at the time of, in advance of the Assembly elections in 2016. Let's hope that those are equally welcomed. Now, Ian Diamond is a very busy man and a very capable man. He's not just doing that review, he's also published another review. So let's move on to some sector developments, because the conference that's happening in London today, the 4th UUK conference, will be looking in particular, I believe, Catherine told me, I think Lucy mentioned it as well, I don't want to put you on the spot, that it will be looking at one of Ian Diamond's other reviews. He's recently completed a review of efficiency, effectiveness and value for money in the university sector across the UK. This is the second of those reviews that he's conducted. Universities UK is a provider's body. It's not a government body. It's a body which exists to represent all universities in the UK, and Universities Wales is part of that network. It's the Welsh component of Universities UK, as Universities Scotland is the Scottish component. So this body is not setting out to enforce government policy, it's setting out to reflect on practice within the sector as relayed by people in the sector and advise people on what's good practice and what is to be encouraged. Now, the report I've read through, I would encourage you to have a look at it. It celebrates lots of very good practice. It talks about the tremendous contribution that the higher education workforce makes. It demonstrates the significant economic impact of universities across the UK. It talks about things that are being done to improve effectiveness and to improve efficiency. There's always a lawnmower when you need one. Drown out the contentious bit. I'll just say some difficult things now. It talks about, it gives benchmarks for the costs of estate. It gives benchmarks for staffing profiles in institutions. It gives an outline of key achievements in research activity and in the funding of research. It talks about how institutions can benefit from sharing assets and sharing services. It talks about creating value from higher education data and how that can improve efficiency just by collecting information about what's being done in different places. People can benchmark and improve what they're doing. And it stresses how oversight and sharing of good practice is to be applauded. So I didn't see the Alliance highlighted as a key case study in that document. That's not because you're not doing good work. It's because perhaps we haven't told them enough about the good work that you're doing. But I think that what I've read about Aber-Bangor and the Strategic Alliance and what it's achieved over the last 8 or so years emphasises for me that you're doing many of those things, and perhaps this is a good point of reference for the future. So other sector developments. Study Wales, I've already mentioned. That's an attempt to bring together the universities in Wales to share resources and on recruitment visits overseas, to avoid the embarrassment of 5 universities from the same part of Wales being at the same recruitment fair at the same time, to consider the possibility of sharing things. Similarly, Global Wales is an attempt to do likewise with research and development activity and with other aspects of what universities do. So, there's sector developments and some of the better practice that's being promoted. So, I am a representative from government. I am here to help you. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I am available to answer questions. And I think there may be some comments that you would want me to hear based on some of the things that I've said to emphasise what you're doing and the good practice that there is here. Catherine. Oh, sorry.
My question, I'm asking this question with 2 hats on, both as director of HR at this university, but with also collaboration with the Aber-Bangor, but also as chair of the CIPD in Mid Wales, which has just been launched. My question is about apprenticeships.
Yeah.
We have a very helpful document, consultation document, that we'll be responding to in April. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about the initiatives that may be considered in terms of apprenticeships.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a very helpful prompt. So 2 things. Apprenticeships have been a very significant success story here in Wales. I was looking at the figures this morning. I think there are 23,000 apprentices have started just in the course of the last year. That's only a little short of the number of first-year undergraduates starting in Welsh institutions, which I believe is around about 29,000. We're keen to build on that success in a number of ways. So first of all, we'd be very keen for public sector bodies to become more involved in hiring and developing their own apprentices. We have apprentices in Welsh Government, the Funding Council does. They make a very significant contribution to the organisation. Secondly, we're very keen to promote shared apprenticeship schemes so that apprentices during the course of their their learning, get exposure to different workplaces and consequently become more valuable in communicating best practice. And thirdly, through that regional planning exercise that I mentioned earlier, the skills implementation plan and the regional groups, North Wales Economic Ambition Board and South West Regional Learning Partnership, we're seeking to promote higher level apprenticeships. So there will, I believe, fingers crossed, hasn't yet been signed off, but I'm hopeful it will be, that there will be an announcement in the next few weeks of a significant investment in higher level apprenticeships to be done through cooperation between further education colleges and universities in different parts of Wales to focus on the development of skills in priority sectors. Our colleagues in the Department for Economy, Science and Transport have identified 9 priority sectors for the Welsh economy. This is a test of my memory to remember all of them, but food and farming, tourism, life sciences, financial and professional services, ICT, construction, energy, and there's creative industries, thank you very much. And there's another one, but you'll come back to it. I'm sure is more important than all of the others. But what we're finding is, for those of you in Bangor, there's significant investments going into Wilfa Newydd. Is it 8,000 jobs planned as a direct result of that over the course of the next 10 years will require large numbers of additional people with construction and energy skills, and many of those will be at level 4, 5, 6, 7. We want to get universities and colleges cooperating to deliver to that agenda. Universities have skills in the accreditation and development of higher level qualifications. Further education colleges and work-based learning providers have skills in the assessment of work-based activity. There's a tremendous scope for joint working there. So that was a long answer to a short question, but yeah, that's a helpful prompt. Any other questions? So if I ask you a question, was there anything in what I said that you found warming, encouraging?
Definitely.
So would you like to elaborate?
I think just the increase of number of high-quality, high-level apprenticeships in itself in Wales is a very good thing. I mean, that itself, I thought, was warming. I haven't attended the full conference, so maybe this is a question which has already been addressed, but I'm just wondering about the implementation of the time frame of the apprenticeship.
Okay. Well, the time frame, we were going to do a pilot in the academic year 15-16, and to complement the piloting of those programmes, we want to see a number develop in different parts of Wales aligned to the priorities that there are. We're also seeking to make a significant investment in staff development for staff, particularly those in the FE and work-based learning sector who perhaps don't have some of the skills for doing for supporting qualifications at this level that will be in place already in universities. So yeah. And I think we feel, certainly talking to large and medium-sized employers and small employers in Wales, schemes that have been around for some time. Some of you will know the Go Wales scheme, which pays for graduate level internships and work experience stroke apprenticeship. Building on those experiences, we know employers find this type of interaction very valuable, and there are a growing number of employers who want to fund and support these types of activity without necessarily being in receipt of government funds. So whether that's Airbus in the northeast, or Admiral in the southeast, or Horizon in the northwest, or Tidal Lagoon in the southwest, we're seeing these things emerge. And what's good for Wales is that they're producing high-value, secure jobs, which will make a big difference to the economy. Yeah.
You talked about study global Wales and
Yeah.
study Wales. Where do you think the relevant position is on study UK or global UK? I mean, where is the relationship between where UK PLC might be
Okay.
doing its Wales overseas? Is
Right.
there a way that we can sort of capitalise on both
Right.
brands?
So this, at the back of the room is the helpful prompt corner. We're very well served, but not everybody knows this. I almost said a Michael Caineism, didn't I? So Colin Reardon, who is the Vice-Chancellor at Cardiff University, heads up the international unit within UUK and oversees a group for Biz and the Prime Minister looking at the development of international education. At the UK level, there are 11 sectors or areas of development identified for the UK economy, and one of those is higher education, which is strange because Theresa May probably hasn't read the plan. But higher education and transnational education is seen as very much an important feature of that. So Colin has been doing a great deal of spreading the word globally on various study trips with Prime Minister and others to develop that. And we're seeking to learn from some of that best practice here in Wales through things like Study Wales. Now, the two institutions, one of the top two institutions for the growth in overseas student numbers in the UK is an institution based here in Wales, and it's not necessarily one that you would have thought of straight away. Cardiff Metropolitan has seen some of the most significant growth in international student recruitment over recent years. And I think quite a bit of that is through the careful analysis of trends in patterns of recruitment and the development of partnerships. And those of you who watch the job pages will have seen that they've recently advertised for Associate Deans International in each of their schools. So there's embedding this international ethos right the way through everything that they do. Now, that's a recipe that seems to be working for them. The challenge in higher education into the future is for institutions individually and collectively to recognise that the same recipe shouldn't work for everyone. It's going to work best if some people are eating pasta and some people are eating fish and chips, whatever. You don't want to all be eating the same thing or the food will run out. So what we need to do is encourage a grown-up conversation about what the strengths of institutions are, what to specialise in, what to build on. I was reminding myself in preparing for today, Aberystwyth, I'm sorry to pick on Aber, but has often been at the forefront of new programme and course development. Geography, drama, Welsh language provision, some of these things happen for the first time here. International politics, international relations teaching happened here. I think the developments in sports science and psychology have come online or are coming online. Have I got that wrong? So it's about playing to strengths, isn't it? You say at Bangor, similar but sometimes different sets of strengths there with regards to I'm playing away from home here, so to do with marine biology and other things that Bangor has historically had great strengths in addition to the things that you share with Aber through IBERS and the work in agriculture and biology and stuff. So, yeah, I think that the challenge from my perspective as somebody who comes from Wales, spent most of their life in England and comes back to Wales, is that I came back to work in Wales because I found the market environment in England very difficult to live with. Its extremes were not ones that I felt comfortable with. And what I found strange coming to Wales is the high level of interinstitutional competition. Because when I was in Manchester, the universities in Manchester cooperate. They do joint estate planning, they have a joint nursery, all the sports facilities are shared, data is shared on programme, but that doesn't happen in Wales. And the advantage of that happening in Manchester was we saved 20% on fixed costs. Before we got up in the morning, we didn't have to make that saving. So there's a lot to be gained. But the experience there, which began with the Commonwealth Games in 2001 and the need to jointly plan and began with the bombing in 1997, it was a successive range of small steps, further and further cooperation. So I've overstayed my welcome and stayed beyond the allotted time. But thank you for listening. I'd be very keen to hear more about the work that you're doing. And if you've got any questions or comments you'd like to pass to me, please do so. Thank you.